Donald Trump signed an executive order to modify the so-called reciprocal tariffs that he had announced back in April, extending a deadline for some countries to negotiate a deal within 1 week. Well, for major trading partner Canada, though, Donald Trump raised import taxes to 35% effective immediately. And in contrast, Mexico was given another 90-day reprieve to negotiate its 25% levy. Here to break it down for us is Carys Garland, from our news desk. Carys, so we've seen a flurry of tariff announcements from Trump in the past few days. It's kind of hard to keep track at this point. Can you summarize us the latest measures? Who's in it? Who's not?
Right, so you'd be forgiven for, if any of this went over your head in the last few days because, like a lot of things with Donald Trump, things move very quickly from day to day. So this latest executive order from the White House updates tariffs, as you said, on dozens of countries with duties ranging from 10 to 41%. And then goods for countries not listed here will face a 10% U.S. import tax. Now, these latest rates will start from August 7, and it's worth noting that when Trump made these initial tariff announcements back in April, as you mentioned, a few days later, he said, okay, we're going to pause these measures for 90 days. Then he delayed them again until this Friday. And so now this is another delay of about a week. But the White House is saying that this shouldn't be read as an extension. This is just to give enough time to Customs and Border Protection to implement these measures. Now, as you said, this includes countries that have struck a deal with the U.S. recently and those that haven't. So for countries like the EU, Japan, South Korea, this is confirming those rates that were negotiated recently. But for some Asian countries that haven't signed a deal, this is actually somewhat of a relief because these new rates are a little bit lower than those that were previously threatened. That includes Taiwan, who's up against a 20% import tax. That's lower than the initial 32% that was threatened, but this is still a steep rate for the world's largest or most important semiconductor exporter. And it's also this executive order doesn't actually include China, for example, the world's second largest economy, after negotiations in Stockholm at the weekend. They're under a separate deadline, if you like, for August 12. But some outliers, as you mentioned, are Canada and Mexico, the US's two largest trade partners, but they're facing very different treatment. Canada is now facing, effective immediately, 35% tariffs. And the reason that the White House gave for that was Canada hasn't done enough to stop illegal narcotics from flowing into the U.S. Now, this has baffled some observers because they say last year U.S. border agents seized about 90 kilos of fentanyl at the frontier with Canada, and that's opposed to 9,600 kilos with Mexico. And on Thursday, by contrast, the president granted Mexico a 90-day reprieve from higher rates on many goods, just to give them time enough to negotiate.
So, Carys, the White House has, of course, framed this whole trade war as a major victory, at least for the United States. Is it appropriate to characterize it that way?
I think if we look back at the Liberation Day announcement that Trump, as he called it, back in April, he said that with these new tariffs, the U.S. would reap the benefits of new revenue, rekindle domestic manufacturing. It would generate hundreds of billion dollars in foreign investment. And it's true that the U.S. has collected significantly more in customs taxes due to these tariffs. The U.S. has brought in more than $100 billion so far this year. For that. That's about 5% of federal revenue compared to 2% in past years. And in late spring, the U.S. actually saw a boost in growth, and that was because businesses in export sales, that was because businesses were rushing to buy any American goods in the fear that they might be subject to tariffs as well. So this is a trend, though, that economists think is going to lose momentum as the rest of the year goes on. But American consumers do remain in the front line of all this. And so far, they haven't seen the higher prices passed on in full. Now, this is an opportunity for companies to assess, to recalculate whether they can pass on those extra costs to consumers and by how much. So if we do see those increase in prices, we might see a hit to consumer spending, and that might in turn delay this interest rate cut that Trump has been so vocal about, the fact that he wants to see that. And And prices of goods are also going to be on voters' minds when they head to the polls for state midterm elections next year and congressional midterms. So, sure, in the short term, this does look good for Trump. He's managed to successfully wield economic measures as a tool to get what he wants, not just financially, but more broadly on the global stage. But in the long term, there's still a lot of uncertainty. The US still hasn't made its announcements about what it's going to do for sectoral tariffs targeting pharmaceuticals and steel. And also, this has kind of served as a wake-up call for many countries. They're thinking now, okay, are we going to have to forge new alliances to reduce dependency on the US? But these are all, of course, things that we're not really going to have answers for immediately. It's going to be more like in the long term in terms of years.
Carys Garland, thank you very much.